Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. I recently purchased my dream house after spending years in a cramped apartment. It was a beautiful property, though it needed some renovations before I could move in. Despite the temporary inconvenience, I was thrilled about the prospect of having my own space. Finally free from the limitations of apartment living, the neighborhood seemed welcoming, with friendly faces eager to greet me. One particular neighbor, Sophie, took an interest in making me feel at home. She invited me to a neighborhood party she planned to host the following month. Another couple, Karen and Steve, seemed friendly enough, but I sensed something off about them. They were overly curious about my moving in plans and the contractors working on my house. However, I dismissed my suspicions as mere curiosity. As the renovations progressed, unbeknownst to me, Karen and Steve devised a scheme to take advantage of my absence. They manipulated the situation, convincing the contractors that they were extended family members helping me prepare a surprise for my move-in. Sadly, the contractors fell for their ruse, allowing them access to my house without my knowledge. Karen and Steve wasted no time in turning my home into their personal party venue. Their friends left behind a mess, staining surfaces and leaving trash scattered throughout. Instead of cleaning up, they treated my house as a storage unit, dumping their old furniture, clothes, and other miscellaneous items inside. The neglect extended to their neglected pets, which they left behind to soil the floors and further damage the house. To add insult to injury, they parked their vehicles on my lawn and driveway, ruining the grass and leaving even more trash behind. Thankfully, Sophie grew suspicious of their behavior and contacted me, urging me to take action. Overwhelmed with anger, I realized I couldn't confront them alone. Concerned for my safety, I decided to involve the authorities. I called the police to report the illegal activities taking place in my home. Additionally, I arranged for a tow company to remove the vehicles parked on my property. When the officers arrived, I explained the situation and showed them the evidence of Karen and Steve's unauthorized occupancy and the damage they caused. Karen and Steve vehemently denied any wrongdoing, claiming I had given them permission. Thankfully, the police saw through their lies and supported my claims. I decided to press charges, but I also hatched a plan for a more satisfying form of retribution. While cleaning up the mess they left behind, I discovered drug paraphernalia and a strong smell of marijuana permeating the house. I saw an opportunity to gather evidence of their involvement in illicit activities. I discreetly observed their interactions, capturing incriminating footage of drug transactions and drug use on their own property. One fateful evening, they carelessly left the garage door open while getting high, unaware that I was vigilantly watching. Seizing the opportunity, I immediately alerted the police to their ongoing illegal activities. The officers swiftly arrived and apprehended Karen and Steve, collecting evidence to support their arrest. The consequence of their actions extended beyond my personal vendetta. It turned out that Karen and Steve's drug involvement was far more severe than anticipated. Their arrest led to the discovery of a larger drug operation, resulting in the loss of their home and custody of their neglected pets. With justice prevailing, I decided to take legal action to recover the damages they caused while invading my home. Meanwhile, I rescued one of their mistreated dogs and provided her with the love and care she deserved. As for Karen and Steve, their misguided attempt to exploit me became their greatest downfall. Messing with me turned out to be their worst decision, as the consequences of their actions engulfed their lives. In the end, my new home became a symbol of resilience, and I vowed to protect it from any further intrusions. The next one is a pro-revenge story. The year was 2008, and I was 9 years into operating a landscape company. I had done moderately well for myself, being able to purchase a home, pay off student loans, and start a family. I employed 4 people during what I call the work season, which for us is March through November. From December through February, we lay off our workers and go on hiatus for the most part. A side note, our company focused mainly on maintenance, and in the Pacific Northwest, once all the leaves are picked up from autumn, there really isn't much maintenance to be done. That year, I had developed a relationship with a home builder who hired me to care for his personal home and very much liked our work. He asked us to start bidding on installing the landscapes for the homes he built. Sounds easy, right? Well, remember, we focused mainly on maintenance, so my crew didn't have a ton of experience in the detailed installation of landscapes. Also, the homes this guy built were not track homes or your cookie-cutter type neighbors you find in the suburbs. No, a small home for him was 3,500 square feet on a 25,000 square feet lot, and an average size he developed was an 8,500 to 10,000 square feet home with all the bells and whistles. He was more generous in his landscape budgets than many of the contractors I'd met, and we were off to what I had hoped would be a great partnership. We finished the first 4 projects he handed us, and it was now the beginning of December when my maintenance side of things dropped off. This home builder came to me and asked if I would like to keep my maintenance crew working for the winter, working for him. I knew his next home project wasn't set to break ground until late January, so I asked what he had in mind. He told me that he and his son had been experimenting with spray foam insulation in their homes, and had decided to invest in purchasing equipment to start their own company. To purchase the equipment on this level was about $100,000. I said I would talk to the crew and get back to him. The next week we signed a contract to work with him for 3 months at a specified pay rate for 5 of us. He was confident he had enough work to keep us busy for the next 3 months. The first job was insulating this incredible house for a plastic surgeon who spared no expense for the gadgets and materials that he put into his home. The next job was government buildings on Fort Lewis, followed by new apartment complexes and so on. Now, this builder, who I was friends with, was not my day-to-day boss while insulating. It was his son, who is younger than I and a bit of a jerk. But we got along fine, and all seemed well. The father owned the insulation company, but had very little to do with it on a day-to-day basis. I hardly saw him for 3 months. Now, being a contractor myself, I was used to not getting paychecks every 2 weeks like most working folks. I would get paid once a month from my maintenance accounts for the previous month of service, and it didn't all come in at once. Sometimes people forget to pay on time. However, my crew was used to getting paid in a timely manner, and after the first month of work, and receiving no check from my new boss, I inquired when to expect a check. He assured me that once the checks started rolling in, we would see our money. I totally get how that works, especially for a new company trying to get off the ground. So I paid my guys to keep the peace on my end, and my boss and I worked out an agreement that I would keep track of everything paid, and he would cut me a check once he was able to. I also had an outstanding landscape invoice with the father of over $10,000 that I wasn't really worried about because he was not always super quick about payment. Not that I had to hound him about it, but you understand. Now we are at the end of February 2009, and it was time to gear up for the new season of landscape maintenance and put my crew back to work outside. Still, no payment from insulation or the last landscape project. Things got ugly real fast as I started daily phone calls to the son, now that we didn't see each other as often. I called the father, who more or less ignored me. The son stopped answering my calls, texts, etc. The father never had a straight answer for me. Now, mid-April 2009, most communication has stopped on their end. I filed a contractor's lien on the landscape project to be paid out before the house sold, which prompted a call from the father to invite me to his home for lunch and talk. I accepted, thinking he was going to offer me a deal of some kind based on my past history with him. He basically told me that he had been over the years screwed out of money by different people, and that it was something that I was going to have to learn to live with. My response? I've been screwed out of money that people owe me as well, just not by anyone I considered a friend. I left his house determined to stick it to him. On May 5th, 2009, I started a spray foam insulation company with the same level of equipment that he had, but about a year less experience than he had. On May 7th, I got a call from the father asking a landscape question, acting as if we were on normal terms. My response was, "Oh, I don't landscape anymore, I spray foam." He asked, "What are you talking about?" When I explained to him that I was operating a spray foam insulation company, he ended the phone call rather quickly. I then received a phone call from his son 5 minutes later, who had ignored my calls for the last many weeks, threatening me that he would destroy my hopes of making it as an insulator, and that no little landscaper would make it in this community. A side note, with my newly formed company, there were now approximately 5 companies in the Pacific Northwest performing this kind of service. It is a small circle of people in the insulation world, and the word gets around pretty quickly about who does what, etc. Our very first job was handed to us by our material supplier, which happened to be his supplier. And that job was a fix. Apparently, that very first job we had worked on, the plastic surgeon's house, was insulated incorrectly and had poor workmanship. Luckily, my only involvement in that house was prep work and clean up. We ended up removing all of the insulation and reinstalling it, which amounted to about a $65,000 job. The owner of the house turned around and sued my old boss for it, and won. We then acquired the government contract at Fort Lewis that he had due to poor communication on his part. Anyway, we systematically took apart his company by being better and honest with people. The story spread in the spray foam insulation world, and we became somewhat hero-like in this region because they had screwed over so many people. Oh, and at that time, if you might remember, the housing market took a giant dump, and guess who had 4 very large houses sitting out there that couldn't sell? Yep, the father who ended up going bankrupt by mid-2009. The son, on the other hand, kept his head above water somehow a bit longer. But in October of 2009, I got a call from a repo man asking if I knew the son and where to find his spray foam equipment. My father-in-law happened to be a retired cop and PI, and I put him on the case to find said equipment. 2 days later, he called with the address and specific location of the equipment, which was behind a barn on an island with the tires aired down. I made the call to the repo man, and 2 hours later, he called me from his lot as he was pulling in with a very large trailer behind his truck, asking where he could send the bounty check. I kept the insulation business for about 3 years before being bought out by another company. I also kept the landscape company and still run it to this day. The moral of the story is landscapers may work in the dirt and seem simple, but piss one off, and they will ruin you. The next one is a petty revenge story. I recently started working in an office. I'm not very happy about it as I prefer working from home, but it's only temporary, so I'm hanging in there. Since I'm trying to save money, I bring my own lunch instead of eating at one of the many restaurants near the office. Soon after I started, I noticed my food going missing from the break room. After digging a bit, I discovered who the culprit was. One of my co-workers, let's call him M, decided it was okay to take my lunch without asking for almost a week. I had to put a stop to this, but since I had no hard evidence like a video of him eating my stuff, I decided to take justice into my own hands. You see, M is a Muslim and apparently very serious about it, to the point that he has to let everyone know about this at least once a day. There's nothing wrong with being serious about your religion, mind you. But when everyone knows you as the Muslim guy because that's the only thing you talk about, you may want to diversify your interests. To me, however, he's known as the lunch looter. Since it's my lunch after all, and I have absolutely no dietary prohibitions, I decided to prepare myself a delicious pork sandwich. Pepperoni, ham, smoked sausage, chorizo, bacon, pork leg, cochinita, and even some chicharron for good measure. Oh, and don't forget extra jalapenos. Normally I don't like them, but I want this one to pack a punch. I call it the Squealing Supreme. Surely any person who adheres to religious rules would be a fool to even go near my succulent sandwich, right? Well, it seems like M is the type of person to grab food from the fridge without checking it first, which led to hilarious results. At some point before my lunch hour, the office was set off by bloody screams coming from the break room. When someone ran off to check, they found poor M crying about eating pork and saying that someone put non-halal meat in the fridge. This was my cue to get HR involved. This level of drama wouldn't go unnoticed anyway, and catching M eating my sandwich was all I needed to get them on my side. Sadly, the payoff wasn't great. He was let off with a warning, and his excuse for taking my lunch is that I always brought halal food, basically just chicken and vegetables. So he took it. It's not that he thought it was for him, he just said he targeted my stuff because I was the only one bringing clean food. He was still quite pissed, and in the last few days he's been giving me the death glare. Morale of the story: don't take people's food. Who knows? Maybe they enjoy the food your religion considers sinful. The next one is an entitled people story. This happened about 10 years ago. I was 22 at the time and had to have knee surgery to clear out shredded cartilage about a week after my birthday. This story takes place 3 days after the surgery. My mom, a nurse important for later, my husband, BF of 2 years at the time, and my best friend decided to take me shopping to try to get my mind off the surgery and to pick up craft supplies so I wouldn't be bored while off work. I should mention it was an orthopedic surgery, so I didn't need to use crutches if I didn't feel the need and should be walking some. When we got to the craft store, not our first stop. My husband and best friend made me use one of the store's wheelchairs. I was being stubborn because I could still walk, just not very fast or as long without breaks. Since I really didn't want to be in the chair, my husband and friend decided to make a game out of it, like who could push me the fastest. Now, you might think we were wrong, but let me state this was in the middle of the day on a Monday, so the store was not busy, and my husband and best friend would check the aisle to make sure the coast was clear. After one of the speeding events, I was looking at something in an aisle, and my mom pulled my husband and best friend away to look at something. It was something she thought I would like and was going to get it as a surprise. Well, I decided I didn't want whatever it was that I was looking at and stood up to put it back. This is when Karen appears, berating me for using the wheelchair as a toy and how there are people who actually need it. I calmly explained that I just had surgery and that is why I am using it. She then goes on and on about how she saw what my friends were doing and that I am obviously lying. I explained that they were trying to make me feel better, and I would tell them to push me normally from now on. This did not appease Karen, and she is still berating me. At this point, I roll up my pant leg and show her the compression bandages I am still wearing. She goes on about how that means nothing, and I could have just wrapped my knee as an excuse in case we were caught, and she bet the other people with me also have their knees wrapped. My group returns at this point and says the same thing as me. Karen is still not having it, and we are all lying. I look at my mom and ask if I can take off my bandages, as they were supposed to be removed the next day. She says I really shouldn't, but she could rewrap it for me if needed. At this point, I take off the bandages before anyone can stop me, showing Karen my knee in all its post-surgery glory. It was bruised, swollen, and crusty at the incision sites, and you could still see the iodine on my skin. Karen's face goes white, and she looks like she is going to be sick. She starts stammering about how I didn't need to go that far. As my mom is rewrapping my knee, scolding me and Karen under her breath, I look at Karen and say, "What else did you want me to do? I told you, they told you, I showed you the bandages. You wouldn't get off your high horse and insisted we were lying." At this point, a staff member comes to check if we need any help, and Karen runs for the door. We had a pleasant rest of our day, and stopped for ice cream on the way home. The next one is an entitled people story. So this happened a few years ago. For some context, I was a 22-year-old, F. Though I do have a baby face and could pass for 16, 17 years old easily. I had a Yamaha motorbike, 125cc, meaning it could easily go 70 miles per hour. My dad raced motocross and I've been riding bikes my whole life. He taught me all the road rules and safety do's and don'ts, so one day I'm riding to visit my uncle who lived in the middle of nowhere and the roads there are all 50 miles per hour and have extreme bends, and on each side of the road is a massive ditch. I'm going 55 miles per hour, only slowing when the bends are bad. Cue a Karen with 3 kids, all under 10, in the back, tailing me. And I mean tailing within a couple of feet to the back of my bike. I speed up to ignore her, and she pulls her minivan to the side of me and tries to force me to the edge of the road, which is just a ditch. I slow and let her pass, my heart racing as I barely keep my bike upright. You'd think this is where it ends, right? Nope. I was maybe a few miles from my uncle's at this point and have to go through a village high street to get there. As I'm going through, I see Karen. Her minivan is blocking the street, and she's standing with her door open in the road, her arms out as she tries to stop me and force me off the road. I just managed to get past her as onlookers were yelling at her to stop. I go the last few streets to my uncle's and stop down the road, parking my bike and taking my helmet off. With a screech, Karen's minivan pulls up in front of me, and she runs towards me, screaming, "What the duck is wrong with you? Don't you know how to drive?" When I just stare at her, she screeches again. "Only cars can drive on the road. Bikes have to drive on the side or pavement." Yeah, nope. That's so wrong. That thing can't go fast enough to be on the road. You should have pulled over when I told you to. I'm going to report you. At this point, I see my uncle coming outside, his eyes shifting between the Karen and me. Now, something to know about my uncle and me is that we are crazy close. Both pranksters. Also, my uncle is 6 feet tall and not a small man. So without skipping a beat, I put on a fake sad face and run to him screaming in a terrified voice. "Daddy, this lady tried to grab me off my bike and followed me home." Where I live, you can get a provisional license before 18, meaning I could have been a minor. Trying not to laugh, my uncle puffs up his chest and yells out at the woman who had run after me and was now behind us. "You followed my little girl home? She's a child." Karen's face went white, and I swear she looked like she had crapped herself as she tried to defend herself, only for my uncle to interrupt her. As loud as he could, making sure every nosy neighbor had come out, he screams, "What are you, some kind of pervert? I'm calling the police." Without blinking, Karen runs for her car, speeding off with 3 confused-looking kids in the back. As soon as Karen was out of view, I told my uncle what happened, and we both laughed as we went inside to see my aunt laughing, as she had watched the whole thing through the window. Update. Okay, so just for clarification, I didn't have a camera as this was years ago, when they costed a lot more than now. And yes, I could have pulled over and called the police, but I was on the bike, and my phone was in my backpack, so I would have had to stop, get my bag off, and grab it. And if you've used bike gloves, you know it's not possible to use a phone with them. I had no intention of stopping, spending all that time, and giving her the opportunity to run for me. As for the police afterwards, I was just happy she had ducked off. The next one is an entitled parent story. I told my dad I wanted my mom's best friend to walk me down the aisle because my mom's best friend has been more of a dad to me than my biological father. He blew up at me saying he was the one who raised me, not my mom's best friend, and that it was his right to walk me down the aisle. He started calling me and my fiancé slurs. My fiancé is Mexican and I am queer, and even threatened to assault my fiancé. He had already insisted I was gay and trans because my fiancé brainwashed me with his democratic views, when my fiancé isn't a Democrat and had nothing to do with my identity. He kept saying I needed to grow up, and that it was his right to walk me down the aisle as my dad, claiming he did his best for me. So I pointed out that he sat by while I was beaten, starved, and verbally abused by my first stepmother. He then stayed with the second stepmom after she tried to strangle me until the cops made him leave her. He also refused to come to the birth of my nephew/his grandson unless he could bring stepmom number 2, despite her assaulting my sister. I highlighted all the abuse and neglect he put me through growing up, and he still insisted he should walk me down the aisle, even though he doesn't approve of my fiancé because my fiancé isn't white. I uninvited him from the wedding, and am going to try to get a restraining order against him. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already.